Welcome, everyone. Today, I'm joined once again by my colleagues John Cassell and Rocco Fiore. I'm Blaze Fellow, and we have a lot to go over today, so let's get into it. With August, of course, kicking off Black Hat, there were a lot of good information and seminars that came out of it. If you'd like to hear more about that, we'll actually be doing another webinar where we unwrap Black Hat's important topics. Stay in touch to learn more about that. Speaking of Black Hat, what I'll be talking about today and in the future in the next webinar is Alan Levieve's down date discovery. So the revelation goes at Black Hat 2024, Safe Breaches security researcher Alan Levive unveiled a 2 0-day vulnerabilities that allow threat actors to perform downgrade attacks on fully updated Windows systems, effectively reintroducing old vulnerabilities by utilizing a tool he created, but he did not make public, which was called Windows Downdate. This tool that implemented downgrading updates and bypassed all verification steps, including integrity verification and the trusted installer enforcement to perform these actions. So what is performing a downgrade? Well, it's essentially like a rollback attack, or what they sound like is what they are. They revert otherwise up-to-date software to older versions, which had vulnerabilities that were then later on patched. This obviously makes them more vulnerable to things that we've discovered and that you wouldn't necessarily be looking for because you thought your devices would be secure. Where did this come from? Well, in 2023, the Black Lotus UEFI bootkit employed a downgrade attack. And this is what got his initial thought process going for could something as important as Windows Update be attacked or focused on to deploy attacks, since mostly that's being utilized to do good things and keeping you up to date. So the malware that they used, Black Lotus, downgraded the Windows Boot Manager to a version vulnerable to CVE 2022-21-894. And this bypassed secure boot. And so with this whole process of working based off this previous kind of exploit, he kind of dove into if there were any kind of mitigations built at the OS level that would prevent these type of downgrade attacks from occurring today. Microsoft, in coordination with the Black Hat talk, issued advisories for the 2 unpatched 0 days tracked as CVE 2024-38202. This one allows an actor to manipulate the windows.old folder where the update system stores the previous Windows installation. And although modifying its files does require special privileges, an attacker with regular user rights can rename the folder, create new windows.old from scratch, and place outdated vulnerable versions of Windows system files in it. The other CVE is 2024-21302, which this Windows this is a Windows Secure Kernel Mode elevation of privilege vulnerability, and is based around the Windows modules installer or the trusted installer, where after you perform patching or those Windows updates, the next step, as we all know, is to reboot the devices. And so what actually happens is there is validation that takes place, but if there's an attacker that's able to get in there and edit some of that information, there's this pending.xml file that is there, and if they're able to access that and change some of the dependencies that is using, the trust installer will execute it, and then it will offer it'll install those older packages to those devices. And so how do you kind of protect against this? There are a few different ways. The most basic ways is through like monitoring of the people who have access to performing system restores or perform update operations, limiting that number so you can control those types of users. And you can utilize that through like access control lists and just generally kind of keeping track of least privilege within your environment. You can configure monitors to check for when elevated privileges are used within your endpoints, as well as update files are modified. And also, there hasn't been any patches really released for this yet. There is one, but it's really risky. It's for those who are looking for more security, perhaps. Microsoft does offer this update, KB 504-2562, which mitigates the severity of 21302, which is related to virtualized base security systems. And so what this does is it adds those files to the revoked list so they can no longer be run or updated on those computers, which of course carries its own risks in the future. So you kind of have to weigh that against what your company wants to do based on where they are and what they offer today. So currently, you can weigh that against. There's no evidence that these vulnerabilities are being exploited in the wild. But now, speaking of exploitation relevance, John has something that does impact all major web browsers. John, would you like to tell us more about that?
Yeah, thanks, Blaze. I'm just going to go ahead and start this off by quoting the Oligo post explicitly, as I did find in looking up this particular vulnerability, or I should say issue, some kind of conflicting articles. So to quote Oligo explicitly, researchers at Oligo Security have disclosed a logical vulnerability to all major browsers, Chromium, Firefox, Safari, that enables external websites to communicate with and potentially exploit software that runs locally on macOS and Linux devices specifically, with Windows not impacted, surprisingly, by this issue. They found that public websites like domains ending in .com obviously are able to communicate with services running on the local network, i.e. local host, and potentially execute arbitrary code on the visitor's host by using the address 0.0.0.0 instead of localhost or 127. They disclosed this actually back in April of this year, which I was surprised to hear about. I heard about this a couple days ago, but then to find out by reading the full article that it was actually disclosed to the manufacturers earlier this year. And it was to all the security teams responsible for each of the major browsers. All teams acknowledged the flaw and will work on changing the related standard as well as implementing browser level mitigations. Per the article, eventually all browsers will block 0.0.0.0, but at the same time, the market demands a common standard to follow as well. To finish the quote here, due to the nature of the vulnerability and complexity of the patch across browsers, it remains exploitable, allowing external websites to communicate with services on localhost. They want to claim that Oligo went on to claim, that 0.0.0.0 stands at 0.015% of all websites on August 7th out of 200 million websites, which is around 100,000 public websites that may be communicating with the address. Per dark reading, I thought this is interesting as well. Most browsers have relied on CORS or cross-origin resource sharing. It's a standard defining a way for client web applications that are loaded in one domain to interact with resources in a different domain. But according to, I might get this wrong, Avi Lumelsky, the Oligo AI security researcher who posted that original article, this is simply not good enough. History proved that a single HTTP request can attack a home router, and if that's all it takes, every user needs to be able to prevent this request from happening at all. Chrome's introduction as well to private network access, or PNA, by adding PNA headers, which goes beyond CORS, should in theory protect websites from the 0.0.0 day bug. It proposes distinguishing between public, private, and local networks, ensuring that pages are loaded under a less secure context and will not be able to communicate with a more secure context. So, a lot of stuff there. If you're not too technical, let me sum that up for you. To resolve that, we need to implement PNA headers, mistrusting any local host networks just because they're local, and even just adding a minimal layer of authorization, even when running on a local host. How do you guys feel about this one, given that obviously it's a proactive push towards a new industry standard? I like how they disclosed it earlier this year, but even now, 4 months later, haven't really seen much change. Probably commitments from manufacturers, but obviously big change has to take place. I also thought it was interesting that rather than tracking, it's obviously a new standard, so nothing here was actually tracked as a particular vulnerability with a CVE.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. We'll see later too, as I'll be speaking as well on new standards that highly impact browsers. We'll be seeing a lot of changes with Chrome, with Firefox, all the browsers out there. But what I find interesting too is that I've been hearing more and more about lesser known secure browsers. One that I've heard recently about is Island. and how that is becoming, people are seeking alternatives altogether. So that's interesting. I don't see how that changes any, any less need for updated standards when they arise within the industry. I see how that can lead to maybe less vulnerabilities within their architecture. But it's definitely, if people are not updating Chrome, are not updating Firefox, are not updating Safari, they should really start focusing on that. I mean, we encounter a lot of entities who only update Windows and don't focus on third parties so much. And there you
I've
go.
I've said it for a long time. I mean,
Um,
I probably said this on so many webcasts in the past. It's something like 3/4 of the amount of vulnerabilities are not within the OS itself. It's every other application out there. So focusing only on OS updates just for the operating system you're running and only focusing on those is obviously not a great idea because everything else you're doing on that OS can then be compromised. We'll jump straight into the next topic. This one I thought was interesting, and there's not a whole lot of information out there. But my point, kind of in the end, I kind of want to leave you guys with as well. I thought it was interesting, given this as well, the potential impact specifically here in the U.S. According to Reuters, two U.S. lawmakers want the Biden administration to probe the Chinese company TP-Link Technology Co. and its affiliates for potential national security risk related to their consumer networking products and fears they could be related to potential cyber attacks. You can kind of already get the feel of a witch hunt at this point. In a bipartisan effort, a Republican and a Democrat have both requested a Commerce Department probe, citing known vulnerabilities in their firmware and additional instances of potential European governmental threats. They called it a glaring national security issue. Given that there are most likely, obviously, millions of TP-Link devices in the U.S. alone, very popular now as of at least the last 10 years. I see them on every shelf whenever I go look at networking equipment. I find this to be a potential huge impact on consumers as well. Open source information indicates that the company may represent serious threats to U.S. ICTS, or Information and Communications Technology Services security. My concern with this finding is that their letter to the U.S. Commerce Secretary doesn't supply any technical evidence, apparently, to substantiate any spying claims. It's also important to recognize that Chinese state-sponsored hackers are hacking not just TP-Link devices, Netgear and Cisco equipment, all the same potential. Instead of the lawmakers focusing on potential for TP-Link routers to become a threat, or they did rather cite numerous past vulnerabilities in TP-Link devices. Come on, man. If we were concerned with manufacturers over the quantity of vulnerabilities in their products, TP-Link is not at the top of that list that especially our government should be concerned about. I mean, there's so many other manufacturers out there, physical and as well software, that we should be equally concerned about. Any thoughts on that?
I think stepping into the idea of creating standardization leads to visibility. With that visibility comes accountability. And so while they're kind of taking a step into the right direction, focusing on the wrong solution. So you got to go to the root of the problem, and kind of maybe they're punching the little guy because he's more punch drunk than some of the bigger contenders out there. So do I respect the attempt? Yes, but the means of doing it probably need to be better than what they're currently doing. So I like how you explained that. You showed that there are moves being taken, but just sometimes just making a move isn't good enough. It's just going to create problems down the line because you're just going to have to revisit it anyway. So feels good to just get it out of the way in your first approach.
100%. To add on to that, really, I mean, let's be honest and be real. I mean, and this is politics. Usually they're years behind anyway, right? And and with that being said, I mean, whether there's politics involved or not, the supply chain is so intertwined. I mean, if we want to talk about what's manufactured in China going back years, we can pick apart everything. I think there needs to be more of a move and discussion towards an open privacy model, where I saw someone recently said about, so social security hack. Well, solution to that might be just dumping everyone's social security numbers online, everybody openly, but building in controls where they can't be used maliciously anymore. Multi-factor authentication is a approach to that. It's even if someone knows your password, well, they're still not going to do much. They still need more factors of authentication. So, um, yeah, that's my
Interesting
opinion
point.
on
Yeah.
it. And yeah,
Yeah, so there's this recent service I think that came out from Azure. It's an Azure AI health bot service. It's in a cloud platform that empowers developers and healthcare organizations to build and deploy compliant AI-powered virtual health assistants that would help them improve processes and hopefully reduce costs for everybody. Rocco, I believe you have more on that. Would you like to give us some more of that information?
yeah. So just quick overview, AI related, as it's been a topic of discussion here in the past. Recent vulnerability that was discovered within Azure by a security researcher, so no exploitation evidence, but within their health bot um, app service. So this is specifically AI agents created for healthcare industry, right? Very high risk industry for many reasons, and we've seen all of the damage done by the Change Healthcare incidents there recently. This vulnerability specifically exploited a data link within the API infrastructure of the AI model, and it opened up the door for server-side request forgery, which led to elevating permissions to global administrator and then having control within the cloud of, full reign within the cloud. My point being in this is that we're seeing more and more of these. And it's, the topic at one time was AI vulnerabilities. Now that we're seeing them being integrated so much into the cloud, Microsoft Cloud developing, um, it will be interesting, and this is just one topic, but it will be interesting to see the development of AI integrated into now becoming cloud vulnerabilities, but AI being the attack surface. And we have the data component, right? And we have the data in transport component with an API vulnerabilities within that system. So that was recent AI headlines. We also got new news in terms of data in transit vulnerabilities about NIST's new post-quantum cryptography standards being published. These were 4 different cryptographic technologies that were published. 3 of them currently available, one more to be later released, but they focus on asymmetric cryptography as well as digital signatures. So focused on replacing RSA as well as a number of other asymmetric standards. Reason being asymmetric standards is they are more vulnerable to quantum attacks, emerging quantum attacks, right? Than AES would be, data at rest, symmetric standards would be, simply due to mathematics known as Shor's algorithm and how that can be used to crack them. But either way, what does that mean at the end of the day? And tying this back to what we were talking about earlier, I mentioned browser-based standards being changed. Asymmetric cryptography is most seen in TLS cryptography, TLS standard, and within browsers, right? VPN, a lot of where we see a lot of the highly exploited vulnerabilities nowadays with VPN technology, browser-based. So there will be a rollout similar to the one JC mentioned in his earlier, a slow rollout of new standards for browsers. So any thoughts, guys, on that one? Anything you want to add?
I think one of the quotes I had read in that article is there's no need to wait for future standards. This is it. I thought that was a pretty bold statement.
Well, that's interesting because I was listening to IBM put out a video with forget his full name, but it's the guy, it's Diffie of Diffie-Hellman, who he was talking about how in the early 2000s they published Diffie-Hellman key exchange technology, and he thought that was it.
Right.
You know, they solved the crisis, the encryption crisis, and here we are. He actively, and what found interesting is he participated in this with IBM and NIST in the selection of these new standards to replace his own standards that he created a long
Right.
time ago. So,
Which I think brings up a great point. With new technology comes new ways to enforce security. And even based on the previous question, this AI becomes more beneficial to each individual. Of course, we're going to need the double-edged sword of securing it. And so, okay, maybe that answer today is the quantum cryptography, where we're providing this whole new level of cryptography that's only accessible because now we created these new quantum processors, or this new technology that allows us to do this new thing that we couldn't even fathom, 10, 20 years ago. So I think Neil deGrasse Tyson also does a lot of this kind of talk, of theoretical future talk. And it's like, what are you most afraid of, Neil? And he's like, I am most afraid of the thing I don't know yet. And it's because you don't know what you don't know. You don't know about the thing that you didn't know about COVID, and COVID was what it was for years. And so I think that's a very kind of I don't think we'll ever be done making things secure, because it's really difficult to understand how people are going to kind of probe and penetrate it and try to work through it. And so, speaking
great point.
of companies that try to help us stay secure, the 400th CNA MITRE marks their
Yeah.
major milestone, minting 400 CNAs as NVD's backlog grows. But Rocco, would you like to give us some more information about those guys?
100%. And it's a great lead into that, because we're talking about things, new technologies that we don't know. We're talking about discovering new vulnerabilities that we didn't know existed there beforehand. And the 400th CNA has been minted. What that means is the CVE number authority by MITRE. This is basically MITRE putting power in the hands of individual vendors to uncover their own vulnerabilities and publish their own CVEs. This was something that did not happen overnight. Won't go into too much detail, but when we were at RSA, we spoke with a number of MITRE individuals who let me know that this was a strategic effort to help with. Now this doesn't help with the NVD backlog. In fact, it could make it quote unquote worse, right? Because you're
Right.
putting the CV out there, and then NVD has to score it, and contribute to enriching that data. But this is recent additions include Wiz, Proton AG, Watchdog, as well as AWS and Azure here. So what's interesting, and some people's takes on it, is that it is failing to contribute in some ways, because some of these CNAs are not contributing. But as we've seen, and it's also adding more and more CVEs, right, that have to be analyzed by the NVD, as I mentioned before. But I mean, I think everyone's take should be it's better to know and have to wait on the analysis than to not know at all. I see this as you can apply just standard security theory to this. My take. This is my take, in my opinion. DC House is a good move. This is an availability issue, right? When we didn't know, and we didn't have access to vulnerability data, and basically we're lessening the dependence on a single point of failure in this case, and decentralizing our the research and discovery efforts of MITRE. I think it's great. Cybersecurity is one of the most tight-knit industries in terms of the community, in terms of ethics, the overarching ethos of working for the public good, and we're all in this together. Very fast moving, but I love making community efforts to uncover new CVEs, new vulnerabilities. With that being said, that's my opinion. I want to hear my colleagues, Blaze and JC's. So shoot, guys, go for it.
Yeah, what you said about decentralizing, when I try not to choose any particular, side. And so for me, it's, needing diversification, but then as well trusting authority at the same time, having that kind of balance and assessing your trade-offs. I mean, that's the most important thing to me. Happy to see the list grow. I want to see the private market. I mean, I'd like to see that list double. But what you said about NVD being limited, obviously, in terms of their ability to assess and provide the better metrics on exploitability, I mean, that's something that also needs to be sped up in my mind.
100%.
Yeah, and I'll kind of piggyback off of what I said earlier. Standardization leads to visibility. So I think it's great that, we're adding more visibility based on what these companies are able to provide, which again adds accountability. So where do resources need to be bolstered so that we can now make this data valuable? Because knowing is only half the battle. We need to make it valuable, like you mentioned, Rocco. And I think it's kind of ironic because John mentioned earlier with the browser vulnerability, isn't that like almost 20 years old, actually, but also not a CVE? So kind of the information is like, this is a perfect example of something that is possibly like highly exploitable, or at least visible, but nobody had the information. And now all of a sudden it's recirculating. And so having that information available, even if it was maybe inactionable or not valuable a while ago, initial efforts, evaluation, and that visibility can help us get to better results and outcome today. Anything else you'd like to kind of let us know about that, Rocco?
No, I mean, speaking about vulnerability disclosure, though, JC is excellent. He does an excellent job of our vulnerability roundup every month. So gonna kick it over to him now and let him give the breakdown of the rundown of vulnerability disclosures, relevant vulnerability disclosures in the past month. So.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And this is more of a focus on as well, given the topic, obviously, this webcast, more of obviously disclosed issues, but actively exploited too, which should always increase our severity. So a lot of updates and advisories did drop just since the beginning of August. So I'll keep this relatively short. The first one that we're always interested in, Microsoft Patch Tuesday on August 13th, solved at least 89 issues with 8 rated critical. We've already discussed a few of them today. In various flavors of Windows and other Microsoft products. They also stated attackers were already exploiting at least 6 of those vulnerabilities in active attacks, as well as 4 publicly disclosed vulnerabilities, with 1 mentioned earlier from the downgrade attacks still not receiving an update to formally mitigate. I won't go through the specifics of the 6 actively exploited issues, since at this point I hope most environments have been patched. But if not, definitely get your phased approach down, start testing, start rolling out. One of those critical issues, though, CVE 2024-38063 with a CVSS of 9.8 and referring to zero-click exploitation in the Windows TCP/IP stack. You probably heard about this one, but it was patched. Moving on to Google Chrome, there were 3 updates since last month. I'm not going to get into the specifics of what happened earlier this month, but the big one dropped yesterday, solving a whopping 38 security issues with 20 of them disclosed by external researchers. That's one of the biggest releases I've seen since I've been talking about these for a few years now. 7 are rated high severity. What makes this release more important for the month? CVE 2024-7971 has been reported as exploited in the wild. This is related to a type confusion issue in the V8 JavaScript engine, common attack vector. It was reported by CFF, of TopSec Alpha Team on July 9th. The total bug bounty payout as well, which has been interesting since this year started with the NVD backlog becoming a big thing. Google's bug bounties have been higher than normal. It was 95,000 US for one particular release, which is probably at the top of the list of what I've seen, with one of the CVEs alone receiving a $36,000 payout. The CISA KEV, can't skip these as well, or the Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency. They have a known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. Since August started, there have been 15 additional vulnerabilities according to their website. Don't want to go through every single one of them. Of course, the 6 Windows 0 days were definitely part of that list. SolarWinds Web Help Desk, remote code execution issue in Microsoft Project, Linux kernel, CLI path traversal in Jenkins, and an Android kernel remote code issue in execution. The Chrome 0-day now or a day later is still not on that list. So I thought that was actually the most interesting bringing that up, is that clearly that's not getting updated as often as we really want. At least not according to their website and release notes. One other thing for Mac users, there were a number of updates dropped starting with July 29th, going into the 7th of August, and then the 19th of August. If you are running Mac OS, though, there was an actively exploited issue in a few versions between Monterey, Ventura, and Sonoma. So do make sure, this is of course from last month, do make sure that you are updated to keep your system secure. That's all I have. Thanks, guys.
All right, then I'll close this out. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. I hope that this has been informative and useful. Every day, the Syxsense team identifies, classifies, and pre-checks various patches and vulnerabilities that affect common endpoints and servers. To get a full listing of all the various issues that may impact your environment, be sure to check out our website at syxsense.com and under resources to access the link to the vulnerability database. What I also love about the vulnerability library is that we not only discuss the level of impact like everyone else, but we offer recommendations and resolutions to every issue. If you have any further questions, concerns, or suggestions for improvement, we would love to hear from you in the comments below or by contacting a team member. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed today's content to keep getting updates from us and the Syxsense team.